Prince Divider's fame was known throughout many lands. Have you ever seen the symbol that he wore on his armor? It shows the mighty sword that split the great stone of Erland in two. You can see it on his shield in the image that this story is showing you right now. The great stone of Erland is much larger than this, of course. Sometimes when people talk of Prince Divider, they write a simple sign that shows his sword splitting the stone of Erland. But what was the stone of Erland, you ask? Well, I will tell you something about it. But the important thing to remember is how Prince Divider came to work together with Mole de Plier, for despite all of the strength possessed by this mighty prince, there was only so much that he could do on his own. And it was only when he worked together with Mole de Plier that his mightiest of deeds were fulfilled. In the city of Erland, in the country of there was a narrow pass between two mountains that formed a natural gateway into the city. The road that passed between the mountains was so narrow that only a single wagon could pass through. Two carts or wagons side by side could not fit. This often troubled the travelers and merchants who had to pass that way many times in a single year. But the guardians of the city were happy about the narrow pass, for it acted as a natural protection, allowing only 5 enemy soldiers abreast to charge upon the city walls. The pass lay to the west of the city, which was protected to the east by steps, cliffs above the sea. One night, many people of the city of Erland jumped from their beds and ran out into the city streets filled with fear. For a great rumbling that seemed to swallow the city with its sound was heard over the mountain tops like a great storm approaching. Suddenly the sky was ablaze, when a single star seemed to fall out of the sky, leaving a fiery trail behind it, and it crashed into the side of one of the surrounding mountains. The fireball tumbled down the mountainside, leaving flame and ash and a trail of burning trees until it lodged itself right in the midst of the narrow pass like a glowing slag heap of metal taller than the city hall. The next day, the people of Erland gathered at the city's entrance to gaze upon the spectacle. The way now was walled in with the great stone that fell from the stars. Thus, most of the city's commerce came to an end. No one visited. The nimblest of citizens could scramble up the mountainsides to pass in and out of the city. But this way was treacherous. No carts or pack animals could move along the steep, narrow paths. However, time passed. Children grew, and new generations of Erlanders replaced the old. And as time passed, the legends of the great stone grew in stature. Some said that a star disappeared from the sky on that day, and that it lodged itself outside the city. Everyone in the city believed this was so. And some of the elders said that the stone itself was not just a star, but a heavenly being who came to earth and now lay asleep outside of the city. On the very night that the stone fell to the earth, Uz-El, the king's minister, known even in faraway lands for his wisdom, had uttered a prophecy. His eyes had become blind a dozen years ago before, but many people said that he saw what others could not see. Uz-El had said that a gift from heaven would come to Erland on that night. Everyone remembered these words, but Uz-El had also said that only the strong one, as strong as star iron, would know its secret. Old Azazel passed away a month later. 27 years after the stone fell to earth, King Zebulun died, and his son Zad began to rule Erland for a long 63 years. His son King Bakha then ruled for 47 years. He passed the throne to his son King Sagun. King Sagun's son was named Devin, the Prince of Erland. Devin's best friend was named Nomis, an old dwarf who lived in caves beneath the mountain. No one knew how old Nomis may have been. Great-grandmothers knew of him, but they said that their grandmothers, now long passed on, too had known of Nomis. It was said that he disappeared for 20 or 30 years at a time, only to resurface into the town at a later date. The boy had found him while he was playing in the abandoned quarry. There were clefts and cracks in the mountains there. Some said that these were passages that led right into the depths of the earth. Some thought that perhaps Nomis lived in the earth's depths. His bent-over posture, his long pointed ears, gangly arms, bald head, and bulbous nose caused some to turn away from him in fright, thinking that he was some kind of demon that had risen from out of the earth. Prince Devin knew no fear, and befriended the dwarf whose appearance scared others away. He regularly brought food to the squirrely old being, and for this act of kindness the strange creature shared many secrets of the earth with him. Nomis showed the boy passages in the mountains that opened to caves deep in the earth. He showed the boy the great heat of the furnace that lived at the heart of the mountain. It was a furnace hotter than any on earth, and it could melt any metal. One other occasion, the boy was shown the dwarf's great hall, bedecked with shields, spears, goblets of gold and silver, rings and chains of iron and bronze, all the many things that Nomis had forged in his blacksmith's foundry. At that time, despair fell over the city. It was a dark time in its history. The population had dwindled. The city had fallen into disrepair. Food was scarce. Education decreased, and the free exchange of ideas diminished. For the sad fact of the matter was that no other cities traded with Erland, and visitors no longer came that way. The city no longer grew, and all of its resources by this time had dwindled. Within the next generation, there would be no more city, for few children had been born for several decades, all because of the great stone of Erland, the heavenly being who lay asleep outside the city. The stone was an object of veneration, and for this reason no one worked to remove it nor build a bridge to cross over it. The great stone of Erland is the strongest thing on earth, said the Erlanders. No sword of iron, no hammer, no chisel can break it. It is heaven's decree that it shall wall off our city from outlanders, said others. Most of the city believed that one should not show any form of dishonor or disrespect to the great stone, except the old dwarf. He had seen meteoric stars fall to earth in another age. He even possessed a large broadsword fashioned out of the iron from a falling star and forged in the belly of a volcano. It was ancient, forged before men lived in Erland, and given to him by his ancestors who once dwelt in the earth's fiery depths. One day, Nomis took aside the prince and said to him, "You shall never become king, young prince." Devin was startled at first, but then retorted, "It is my destiny to become king of Erland. My father Sagun has assured me to this." "You may wear a crown," said Nomus, "but what is a crown without a royal city? Look around you, young prince. Do you see children your own age playing in the streets? There are no children. Do you see merchants busy at work? All of the shops are closed. Do you see a fresh harvest of grain? Only the palace has food. The city will no longer live by the time you wear the crown." Though the words stung him, Devin knew that the wise dwarf spoke the truth. "What is the cause of all of this?" he blurted out. "What can I do to change it?" "The cause of this woe is the great stone that has enchanted the people and walled off our city from the world. The city cannot exist on its own. A lake without fresh water flowing in and flowing out soon becomes stagnant and dries out, exhausting all of its moisture. You must break this great stone, young prince. You must break it to save the city and to ensure your kingship." "But everyone knows that no tools can crack the great stone of Erland," said the prince. "I have the tool," said the dwarf. Then the prince was taken down into the wide hall fashioned from a cave where hung all of the dwarf's treasures. He pulled down the sword made of star iron from a mantle of rock and handed it to the boy. "Strike with this," he said, "and end the affliction." The next morning, armed with the ancient sword and adorned with his prince's robe and crown, Prince Devin strode up the great stone of Erland and raised his sword. The people who gathered there each morning to pray before the stone gasped. Some yelled out to him to stop, for if the stone were dishonored, heaven might destroy the city. For a moment, the boy's courage failed, and he struck a blow that glanced off the side, sending sparks flying. "The stone is angry," yelled a bystander. "Stop the prince!" yelled a dozen voices, and they, along with the palace guards, thinking that the prince had gone mad, rushed forward to seize him. This time the prince did not hesitate and swung the huge sword over his shoulder, bringing it down with all of his might, square upon the face of the stone. A shower of sparks flew in all directions, and then a loud crack caused all to stand in silence. The stone was split. A large crack opened down its center, and the two halves began to fall apart. The inside of the stone gleamed with a silvery metal, the same kind of metal that formed the sword, star iron. With the stone broken, so too was broken the spell cast over Erland. The iron within the stone provided a prized commodity for Erland, and soon trade was re-established. Little by little it was removed until in time the stone no longer blocked the way to the city. The sword that split the stone became the sign for Prince Devin to wear upon his shield. He then set out for other lands, for his sword bore another secret that you shall learn in time. For he discovered that when he struck the ground with his sword, whatever was laid before it would divide into equal parts. When the children saw him, they did not always remember that his name was Devin, so they called him Prince Divider. One day 4 sisters came to him with a cage full of 12 hens. They argued with one another. One sister said she should have 6 hens, and the other 3 sisters have the rest. Another said that she should have 5 hens. They could not agree. "Why not divide them equally?" said the prince. and then struck the ground with his sword 4 times, 1 time for each sister. How many do you think each of them received? To try this, gather your 12 stones and divide them equally among 4 parts, 1 for each sister, until each pile has the same amount in it. And when you use your stones and you divide them into 4 equal piles, each pile should have 3 stones. We will do this math together, and this is the end of the story.